There are moments in life when everything doesn't shatter loudly. It simply grows quiet. Dreams don't scream when they slip away. They fade gently, like a light left on too long. This is a story about discipline, not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that stays when motivation disappears, the kind that shows up in silence, the kind that rebuilds a life one ordinary night at a time. It's about how healing often begins not with passion, but with patience, and how strength is sometimes just the decision to keep going when no one is watching. In a forgotten industrial town where streetlights flicker like tired stars, there lived a night guard named Elliot Rowan, a man who once believed discipline was punishment, until it became the steady light that saved him. Elliot Rowan worked while the world slept. Every night, just before dusk surrendered to darkness, he put on the same navy blue uniform, checked the same worn ID badge, and stepped into the same security booth at the edge of an old industrial complex. The building had once been alive, machines roaring, workers laughing, purpose humming through concrete walls. Now it stood half forgotten, like a memory no one visited anymore. The nights were long, quiet enough that Elliot could hear his own thoughts echo louder than his footsteps. He walked the same route every hour, counted the same doors, checked the same locks. The discipline of repetition kept the chaos of his mind at bay, at least on the surface. To anyone watching, he looked composed, responsible, steady, but inside there was a dull ache he had learned to live with, a sense that life had somehow passed him by while he stood still, guarding something that no longer mattered. Once, Elliot had believed discipline was for people chasing big dreams, athletes, entrepreneurs, artists with fire in their eyes. He used to have that fire too, years ago when he believed effort guaranteed progress, when waking up early felt meaningful, when routines felt like ladders instead of cages. Now, discipline felt more like survival. He wasn't lazy. That was the painful truth. He showed up every night, never late, never careless. But his discipline had no direction, only maintenance. He wasn't building anything. He was preserving what little remained. During his breaks, he sat alone with a thermos of coffee gone lukewarm, scrolling past other people's lives, promotions, engagements, new beginnings. He told himself he didn't envy them. He told himself contentment was enough, but his chest tightened each time, as if his heart knew a truth his mind refused to accept. Elliot wanted more. Not loudly, not desperately. Quietly. Like a whisper he pretended not to hear. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the feeling of being unfinished, like a book closed too early. Like a song that never reached its chorus. Some nights, as he stood under flickering fluorescent lights, he wondered when exactly he had stopped trying. There had been no single failure, no dramatic collapse, just small compromises, missed mornings. Tomorrow, spoken too many times. Discipline, once flexible and kind, had slowly disappeared, replaced by routine without intention. And yet, something kept him going. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear, or maybe, buried beneath the fatigue and regret, there was still a quiet belief that showing up mattered, even if he didn't know why yet. As the clock crept toward midnight, Elliot adjusted his jacket and continued his patrol. Each step echoed through the empty halls. Each step was the same as the last, but somewhere deep inside him, unnoticed even by himself, a question began to form. What if discipline wasn't about forcing yourself forward, but about staying long enough to find your way back? The night didn't answer, but it listened. Change didn't arrive in Elliot Rowan's life like a sunrise. It came quietly, almost accidentally. It began with something insignificant, a decision so small it barely felt like a decision at all. One night, during his break, Elliot noticed how scattered everything around him felt. His locker was cluttered with old receipts and forgotten notes. His desk held a coffee ring that never seemed to dry. Even his thoughts felt disorganized, drifting without direction. For reasons he couldn't explain, the mess began to irritate him. Not angrily, but deeply, as if disorder was mirroring something inside him he had been trying not to see. So he cleaned. He wiped the desk, folded his jacket instead of throwing it over the chair, lined up his keys instead of letting them scatter. When he finished, the space looked the same to anyone else, but to Elliot, it felt different, calmer, intentional. That night, the silence felt less heavy. The next evening, he arrived 10 minutes early, not because he had to, because he wanted to. He walked his route with a little more awareness, noticing cracks in the floor, the hum of distant traffic, the rhythm of his own breathing. Discipline, he realized, didn't always announce itself as ambition. Sometimes it showed up as attention. Soon, small rituals formed. He drank water before coffee. He stretched his back during patrols. He wrote the date at the top of a small notebook he'd found in a drawer and jotted down one sentence before each shift. Not goals, not dreams, just observations. Cold air tonight. Light flickering near the west gate. I feel tired, but steady. These acts didn't change his life, but they changed his nights. With structure came a strange, fragile hope. Not the loud kind that promises miracles, but the quiet kind that says, "You're still here. You still care." Discipline began to feel less like a cage and more like a handrail, something to lean on when balance felt uncertain. Elliot started sleeping better during the day, waking up at the same time, even when he didn't need to, cooking simple meals instead of eating whatever was easiest. None of it made him happier overnight, but it made him present, and presence brought clarity. For the first time in years, he felt momentum, not forward, not upward, but inward. A slow alignment, a sense that his life, though small, was no longer drifting, but hidden beneath this newfound order was a flaw he didn't yet recognize. Elliot believed discipline would protect him from pain, that if he controlled enough, prepared enough, stayed consistent enough, nothing could take this fragile progress away. He didn't know yet that discipline is not armor. It is a compass. And compasses don't stop storms. They only help you walk through them. On one particularly quiet night, Elliot paused under a glowing security light and allowed himself a rare thought. Maybe I'm not too late. The thought scared him more than despair ever had. Because hope, once awakened, has something to lose. The collapse didn't arrive with drama. No shouting. No warning. Just a single moment that unraveled weeks of quiet effort. It happened on a night that felt no different from the rest. Elliot Rowan had completed his first patrol, logged the usual notes, and settled into his chair when the radio crackled with urgency. A breach alarm, false as it turned out, but protocol demanded speed. In the rush, in the break of routine, Elliot missed something small. A door he assumed was locked, a check he marked complete without verifying. By morning, it was discovered. Not a crime, not a disaster, but a failure. His supervisor didn't yell. That almost made it worse. The disappointment was calm, professional, heavy. Words like careless and below standard echoed longer than any punishment could have. Elliot nodded, apologized, promised it wouldn't happen again. But something inside him cracked. It wasn't about the mistake. It was about what it meant. For weeks, disciplines had been the fragile thread holding him together, the proof that he was changing, improving, becoming someone reliable not just in title, but in truth. And now, with one overlooked detail, that belief collapsed. On the walk home, the city felt louder than usual. The sunrise looked indifferent. Elliot replayed the moment again and again, convinced that this single failure erased all progress. Old thoughts returned, sharp and familiar. You always mess it up. You can't be trusted. This is who you are. That day, he didn't sleep. He lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of something deeper than exhaustion. Shame. Not the kind that comes from doing something wrong, but the kind that convinces you that you are wrong. That night, returning to work felt different. The uniform felt heavier. The routine, once grounding, now felt mocking. Each step reminded him of the flaw discipline hadn't fixed. Each door felt like an accusation. Elliot tried to tighten his control. He checked locks twice, then 3 times. He walked faster, took fewer breaks, forced focus with clenched teeth. Discipline, once gentle, became rigid, punitive, a way to prove something, to himself, to everyone. But pressure doesn't create strength, it creates cracks. By the end of the week, Elliot was exhausted. His notes became sloppy, his sleep fractured. The very discipline he relied on was collapsing under the weight of perfection. One night, standing under the same flickering light where hope once whispered, Elliot felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of losing his job. Fear of losing himself again. The light above him buzzed once, then went dark. For a few seconds, he stood in complete shadow, heart racing, breath shallow. The darkness felt symbolic, too perfect to ignore. In that silence, a painful truth surfaced. Discipline hadn't failed him. He had misunderstood it, but understanding comes later. First comes the fall. Elliot Rowan refused to let go, not of the mistake, not of the version of himself he thought he was becoming, not of the belief that discipline meant control. Tight, absolute, unforgiving. In the days that followed, his life shrank. Not outwardly, no one noticed anything different, but inwardly, everything narrowed. His world became a checklist, a series of rules he wrote for himself and punished himself for breaking. Wake at the same minute, walk the same path at the same pace, check every door the same number of times, write the same kind of notes in the same handwriting. If he stayed perfect long enough, he believed the shame would dissolve. It didn't. Discipline, once a source of calm, became a negotiation with fear. Every task carried the weight of what might happen if he failed again. His shoulders stayed tense, his jaw locked. Even rest felt undeserved, like something that had to be earned through exhaustion. He stopped writing observations in his notebook. They felt too honest, too soft. Instead, he filled the pages with rigid lists and harsh reminders. Don't miss anything. Pay attention. This is your only job. At home, he avoided mirrors. At work, he avoided conversation. Silence became his refuge and his prison. Letting go felt dangerous, because if he loosened his grip even slightly, he feared everything would collapse again. Somewhere along the way, discipline stopped being about growth and became about penance. Elliot told himself this was strength, but his body told a different story. His sleep grew shallow. His appetite disappeared. The nights stretched longer, heavier. He was always alert, always bracing for the next mistake. The smallest disruptions, a delayed radio call, a flickering light, sent his pulse racing. And beneath it all lived a quiet grief. Grief for the man he thought he could be. Grief for the life that seemed close, then slipped away. Grief for the idea that effort would be rewarded fairly. On one particularly cold night, Elliot found himself standing still, mid-patrol, staring at a locked door he had already checked twice. His hand hovered near the handle, frozen. He couldn't remember if he had actually locked it or just convinced himself he had. For the first time, discipline didn't feel like safety. It felt like suffocation. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal and closed his eyes. The building hummed around him, indifferent, and in that moment, a thought surfaced. Quiet, frightening, honest. I don't know how to do this without hurting myself. Holding on had become heavier than letting go, but he didn't yet know how to release without falling apart. So he tightened his grip again, and the night grew longer. There is a particular kind of night that doesn't pass. It doesn't move forward with the hours or soften with morning. It lingers. It settles inside you. For Elliot Rowan, that night arrived without warning. He didn't notice it at first. He was doing everything right, at least on paper. Every door checked, every report filed, every rule obeyed. And yet, something had drained from him. The work no longer anchored him. The routine no longer soothed him. Discipline had become hollow, like a shell protecting nothing. The building felt larger than usual. Hallways stretched endlessly. The echo of his footsteps sounded unfamiliar, as if someone else were walking in his place. The radio stayed silent for hours. Even the city beyond the walls seemed distant, unreachable. During his break, Elliot sat alone in the booth, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he didn't taste. He didn't scroll his phone. He didn't write. He simply stared at the window, watching dust drift through the beam of a single light. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing to distract him from himself. And the emptiness answered. It wasn't dramatic sadness. It was worse. It was numbness. A quiet realization settled in. Even if he never failed again, nothing would change. He could perfect this routine and still feel lost. Discipline, stripped of meaning, had become endurance. And endurance alone couldn't save him. The thought frightened him. What was left if discipline didn't lead anywhere? Elliot felt suddenly small, not insignificant, but exposed, like a man standing in the open after years of hiding behind structure. The silence pressed in. Memories surfaced uninvited. Choices he didn't make, risks he avoided, moments he postponed until later. Later had never arrived. His chest tightened. Breathing felt shallow. Not panic, just a deep, steady ache. The realization that he had been using discipline not to build a life, but to avoid feeling its absence. He stood and began walking, not following his usual route, just moving, through corridors that led nowhere important, through spaces that reminded him of how many things end quietly. Eventually, he reached the far edge of the complex where a single security light illuminated a bench no one ever used. Elliot sat down, and for the first time in years, he did nothing. No check-in, no correcting, no proving. The stillness was unbearable at first. His thoughts raced, searching for something to hold on to, But slowly, as minutes passed, the noise faded. What remained was raw honesty. "I am tired," he admitted. "Not of the work, not of the nights. I'm tired of running from myself." Tears came, not heavy, not loud, just a quiet release, slipping down his face unnoticed in the dark. This was the lowest point, not because everything was gone, but because he finally saw the truth. Discipline without compassion had emptied him. Control without purpose had isolated him, and holding on had kept him from healing. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time, he stopped resisting the night. And that made room for something new. Elliot Rowan didn't plan the encounter. It happened the way most important things do, quietly, without ceremony, without intention. The following night, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Not because Elliot felt better, but because he felt emptied. When you reach the bottom, there is a strange calm that follows. No expectations, no pressure to perform, just presence. Near the end of his shift, as dawn began to thin the darkness, Elliot noticed someone sitting on the bench by the outer fence, the same bench where he had sat the night before. Visitors were rare at that hour. He approached slowly, cautious but not alarmed. It was an older man, late 60s, maybe more. His coat was worn but clean. His posture relaxed, as if he had nowhere else to be. He wasn't trespassing, just resting, watching the sky soften. Elliot cleared his throat. "Sir, everything okay?" The man smiled, not politely, genuinely. "Just waiting for the light to change," he said. Elliot frowned slightly. "The light?" The man nodded toward the horizon, where night was slowly surrendering. "I come here sometimes. Helps me remember that things move on their own, whether we force them or not." They sat in silence after that. No awkwardness, no urgency to fill the space, just two strangers sharing the quiet. After a moment, the man spoke again. "You look tired." Elliot almost laughed. He had heard that sentence his whole life, but this time it landed differently. He nodded. "Yeah." "Tired from holding something too tight?" the man asked gently. Elliot's chest tightened. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man didn't push. He picked up a small stone from the ground, rolled it between his fingers. "You know," he said, "I used to think discipline meant never letting go, never slipping, never resting." He placed the stone down. "Turns out, discipline is just deciding what deserves your energy and what doesn't." Elliot looked at him. "Then what do you do when you fail?" The man smiled again, softer this time. "You stay." The word echoed. "Most people quit on themselves after failure," the man continued. "They think discipline is about punishment. But real discipline is devotion. It's staying with your life even when it disappoints you." The sky began to glow faintly. The shift change was approaching. Elliot felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, but understanding. Discipline wasn't control. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't self-denial. It was presence. The man stood, brushing dust from his coat. "Be kind with what you repeat," he said as he walked away. "That's who you become." Elliot watched him disappear beyond the fence. The bench was empty again, but the truth remained. Elliot Rowan didn't change everything at once. He changed one thing. He stayed. The next night, when the weight returned, as it always did, he didn't tighten his grip. He noticed it. When the urge to overcheck, to rush, to punish himself appeared, He paused, not to correct it immediately, just to observe. Staying felt uncomfortable at first. Without rigid control, his mind searched for threats, for mistakes waiting to happen. But instead of reacting, Elliot breathed, slowly, intentionally. He reminded himself of the old man's words, "Discipline is devotion." So he devoted himself to something new, kindness toward consistency. He returned to the notebook, but the lists were gone. In their place, he wrote one line each night, not a judgment, not a demand. I showed up. I paid attention. I rested when I could. These weren't achievements. They were acknowledgments. At work, he followed protocol, but without fear. One careful check, one honest note, no rushing, no proving. When doubt whispered, he didn't argue. He simply stayed present, grounded in the moment in front of him. At home, he allowed rest without guilt. He slept when tired, ate when hungry. Discipline expanded beyond productivity. It became self-respect. Healing didn't arrive like a breakthrough. It arrived like alignment. There were still mistakes, still moments of insecurity, but they no longer erased him. Failure became information, not identity. Elliot began to understand something profound. Discipline was not about becoming someone new. It was about returning to who he had been before fear taught him to hide. The night softened. The routine remained, but now it held meaning. Each step was an act of care. Each choice a quiet promise kept. He wasn't chasing transformation anymore. He was practicing it. Growth doesn't announce itself with certainty. It waits, and then it tests you. For Elliot Rowan, the test arrived on a night that felt too familiar. The radio malfunctioned mid-shift, crackling unpredictably. A delivery arrived late. The lights in the East Wing flickered like they used to. The same conditions that once sent his pulse racing returned, almost deliberately, as if life itself was asking a question. Who are you now? Elliot felt the old pull immediately, the urge to tighten, to rush, to overcorrect. His body remembered the pattern even before his mind did. Discipline, distorted by fear, tried to reclaim control. For a moment, he stood still. This was the edge, the place where transformation either deepened or collapsed. He took a breath. One check at a time, he told himself. Not perfect, present. He walked the route calmly. When the radio failed, he followed procedure. No panic. When a door stuck, he didn't force it. He logged it. He stayed. The night dragged on, uncomfortable and uncertain. But Elliot didn't abandon himself. That was the difference. Discipline, he realized, wasn't proven in calm moments. It was proven when chaos invited old habits back. By dawn, exhaustion settled in, but so did pride. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that says, "You didn't run." The old pull would return again. He knew that now, but so would he. Morning came differently now, not brighter, not easier, just softer. Elliot Rowan noticed it one day as he walked home under a pale sky that no longer felt like an ending. For years, dawn had been something to survive, an exhausted finish line after a long night. Now it felt like a pause, a quiet exhale. He no longer rushed to sleep the moment he stepped inside. Sometimes he sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city wake. Delivery trucks rolled past. A woman walked her dog. Someone laughed in the distance. Ordinary life, moving without him needing to chase it. And for the first time, that felt okay. Discipline had reshaped itself. It wasn't rigid anymore. It breathed. It allowed space. Elliot still followed his routines, but now they served him, not the other way around. He woke at consistent hours, ate simply, moved his body when it felt heavy, rested when it didn't. Purpose no longer screamed, it whispered. He realized he didn't need a dramatic reinvention to live meaningfully. Purpose lived in attention, in care, in the decision to show up honestly again and again. The nights at work grew lighter, not because they changed, but because Elliot did. He walked the same halls, checked the same doors, logged the same reports, but he was no longer guarding emptiness. He was guarding peace. Discipline had not made him extraordinary. It had made him whole. If you're listening to this, there's a quiet chance you recognize yourself in Elliot Rowan, not in his job, not in his routine, but in his tiredness. There are moments in life when motivation disappears and all that's left is repetition, when dreams feel distant and discipline feels heavy, when you keep going, not because you're inspired, but because stopping would hurt more. Here is the truth Elliot learned slowly, patiently, and honestly. Discipline is not punishment. It is self-respect practiced daily. It is choosing to stay when quitting would be easier. It is forgiving yourself without abandoning responsibility. It is letting go of perfection so progress can breathe. Healing begins when you stop using discipline to control who you are and start using it to care for who you're becoming. Failure does not erase you. It refines you. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means releasing the version of discipline that hurts you. Strength isn't loud, it's consistent. Purpose isn't found in grand achievements. It's built in ordinary moments honored fully. Your journey doesn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful. It needs to be honest. So tonight, or tomorrow morning, or the next quiet moment you have, choose one small act of devotion. Show up gently, stay, repeat. That is how rebirth happens. And if this story brought you peace, clarity, or strength, share it with someone who needs it. Like it. Subscribe. Not because you're chasing something new, but because you're learning to stay with what matters. The light doesn't need to be bright. It just needs to be steady.